I think the thing that, to be honest, what I would most like to get out of this occasion this morning is, apart from us addressing you, we would really like to hear back from you about other solutions to the problems that I think we all have a very common understanding of. To my mind, one of the great values of an occasion like this happening in an international framework is that it gives us an opportunity to look more widely than the nation or the region that we are, to look across the globe and to hear about other solutions to the problems that I think we've probably all got quite a wide range of agreement on. So I'm very much hoping that when we get to the Q&A session after Luigi and I have spoken, that I would really like to hear from colleagues in other countries about how they are tackling the issues that I'm just going to sketch out now. That said, I've decided that, unlike, I think, how Luigi is going to play this, I'm going to begin my presentation by talking to you a little bit about how the situation looks in the UK at the moment, and then I'm going to move on to talk about how I'm seeing some of the structural challenges facing our industry. I'm going to talk a little bit about how that segues into regulatory challenges. And then finally, I'd like to say a word or two about how in these really quite difficult times we hang on to the importance of recognizing that what certainly we as regulators are doing, and what I hope you as businesses are doing, is keeping pretty focused on consumers and what is being delivered to them. So a very short, just a sort of gallop through what has been happening in UK markets since the banking crisis hit us almost exactly 2 years ago. It's quite salutary, isn't it, to reflect that in October 2008 we were all probably talking about somewhat different things from the issues we're talking about this morning. So what's been happening? Well, first of all, Ofcom's research suggests that in the communications sector, for the first time in 2009, revenues right across the sector actually declined. And this is across all the sectors that we regulate. We estimate that in 2009, telecoms revenues were down by 2.7%. Television income declined by 0.4%, interestingly, not an enormous number there. Radio revenue down by 4%. Now, obviously those numbers are significant, but very interestingly, I think there are grounds for some optimism that the sector is now starting a recovery. I wouldn't want to overestimate this. As Bob mentioned at the beginning, as well as being a regulator, I'm also an economist. I've been an economic forecaster in my time, and I have to tell you I am pretty cautious about the strength of the recovery that we're seeing in our sector, but the figures are there. If you look at the results from leading UK providers like BT, Sky, Virgin, ITV, they're all showing a marked improvement in the first half of 2010. And remarkably, ITV, our main commercial broadcaster, their earnings before tax have tripled in the last 6 months. Now, when we look behind those numbers, you can see some quite interesting things which actually connect what we're talking about now straight back to what we were just hearing from the representative of the Commission about how consumers are reacting right across the world to the opportunities of digital technology. You might have expected that during a period of severe recession, with all the consequences of that for consumer confidence and spending, that you would see a sharp reduction in so-called discretionary spending. But there is now strong evidence that consumers are not seeing spending on communications as discretionary, but as essential. And this goes right back to discussions we were having in the regulators group yesterday about the importance of universal service, and the point that Bob Pepper was just making about actually what are the absolutely crucial networks. I believe that the question of the centrality of communications networks in people's expectations of the society that they live in, I think that's an important emerging global phenomenon which influences everything that we are talking about today. What's my evidence for this? Well, as I've said, during a time of quite severe recession, in the UK, take-up of digital TV and broadband continues to grow. Interestingly, again in the light of the presentation we've just seen from the Commission, we're seeing an increase in take-up amongst older people, and of course the growth of mobile broadband means that the broadband market is growing very fast. This year, it's grown by 5%. New products, which people might once have regarded as luxuries, are now also finding a market. For instance, high-definition television is now established as a very successful mass-market consumer proposition. Many, not me, I may add, but many people are predicting a major push on 3D television. I have to say I find that a little bit hard to imagine, but I'm usually wrong about these predictions about consumer take-up of new technologies. So maybe by Christmas time we'll all be sitting in our homes watching something with 3D vision on. But the most startling trend of all, of course, and this is one echoed right across the globe, and it's running strongly against the tide of the economic slowdown, has been the rapid rise in smartphone subscriptions. So why, you might be asking, if consumers are so willing to buy more services and ever more powerful devices, has industry revenue declined? Well, there's a reason for that, which everybody here from the industry in this room will know, which is there is strong evidence that consumers are exercising choices between providers. They're searching out the best deals, the best prices, and the trend is accelerating for consumers to switch away from, for example, the relatively high prices of the profitable traditional telephony to cheaper data services and VoIP. So although consumers have been facing very tough economic times, they're strongly benefiting from competition. And this is why, I should add, that why we as regulators in the UK are keeping up the focus on issues that are very important for consumers, like how easy is it to switch and how transparent are the costs of the products that are on offer. So where does that leave the structural challenges facing the industry? Well, again, if you look at what is happening in terms of provision, digital multi-channel television is now the norm for the majority of UK households, and I believe that that is a pattern that we are seeing rapidly replicated elsewhere. An increasing proportion of viewing in the UK is on demand, time shifted, online, or viewed on mobile devices. And television content is increasingly packaged and sold to the viewer as part of a single bundle, which also includes broadband, fixed, and sometimes mobile telephony. So the big structural changes that we're seeing in the industry. Now, while there's obviously going to be ongoing demand for the free-to-air television channels, just as there is for no-frills telephony, many consumers and viewers will increasingly find that their needs are going to be addressed through the provision of bigger and ever more complex bundles. And to succeed in that space, as we've heard this morning already from several different speakers, firms are going to need to be able to offer high-quality networks, attractive, easy-to-use equipment, and compelling content that will draw people across technological thresholds that they might have hitherto found it a little bit difficult to contemplate crossing. The compelling content will draw people in. And I suspect that the ability to move content and applications seamlessly across devices is going to prove critical. Now, for the traditional players in the telecoms industry, this shift in the competitive landscape is going to provide a real challenge. This is, of course, a global conference today, but I just wanted to make the rather obvious point that from the standpoint of many European businesses, this will pose a very particular and specific challenge. The point of that remark is that, as you know, the financial success of European telecoms firms and equipment manufacturers in particular over the last decade was buoyed by the growth of the 2G and the 3G mobile market. The European sector had a very, very strong starting position in terms of standards and capability. But new forces are now making themselves felt. If you take the smartphone, the ubiquitous and massively successful device, of course it was Apple that essentially got ahead of other firms in the provision of this device with the launch of the iPhone. And whilst many providers are now responding strongly to that challenge, Apple's success has raised some interesting and important questions about who gets to benefit, who gets to generate and retain the value in this new era of the mobile internet. Questions: will the telecoms and operators continue to control innovation and retain a substantial share of the value generated by these new apps and services? Or will this value go to the provider of the hardware, of the operating system, or of the content and the apps themselves? Now, if any of those shifts take place, which economies will reap the benefits? So I think I just want to sort of flag that up as an interesting global issue for what is indeed a global conference. Now, moving on to the question of networks, there are a series of equally interesting and difficult challenges for the networks. The most compelling of these, again, as we've heard this morning, is how far and how fast the sector should and indeed can upgrade to next generation access. Now, you might well say, given everything I've just said about the seemingly large and growing demand from consumers for products, applications, and content that are network hungry, what's the problem? We've already heard, however, this morning from previous speakers exactly what that problem is. The problem in a nutshell, and I know Luigi is going to dilate on this a little bit more in a minute, how is the capital necessary to build out those networks going to be remunerated? Will consumers be prepared to pay for what they seem to be demanding? And if they're not, at what speed can new network investment be rolled out? If all of the money or a significant proportion of the revenue being generated from consumer demand starts to flow not to the telcos, but to the various providers of content, applications and services, then it is going to become exceedingly difficult for telco shareholders to receive the kind of returns that they would expect from their investment. Now, where does that leave us then in terms of what is likely to happen if we're seeing strong growing consumer demand, if we're seeing uncertainty on the part of the telcos about how much of the revenue that flows from that they're going to be able to devote to remunerating the investment that they believe they need to make? Well, just to give you a UK perspective on this, at Ofcom we believe that most NGA investment must come from the private sector. Our incumbents will play a substantial role, and we believe, therefore, it's obviously important to clarify the regulation that applies to incumbents. We've got to ensure that competition prevails and that investment takes place. For our part, we have just published, as many of you may know, our own plans to deliver both certainty around the regulated products which our incumbent BT must offer, and this is very important in the system we aim to run, flexibility on the pricing of those products. And the European Commission's recent recommendation seeks to strike a similar balance between regulatory certainty and pricing flexibility. Now, attention is also being focused, and again, I'm sure this is not a European problem, the one that I'm about to dilate on. I'm sure this is a global problem, and I would very much like to hear more about it from others in this room. Attention is being focused on how you extend the reach of next generation networks when the market has exhausted its capacity to do so. We just heard from our speaker from the Commission about Commissioner Cruz's ambitious agenda for digital Europe. Other jurisdictions I know have got equally ambitious agendas. Some are considerably further down the track than we are here in Europe. Now, how do you do this? What is the point at which, as a regulator or as a government, you can make the decision about that is as far as the market is going to take you? How do you determine what the boundary is there? And if you decide you have come to that point, how do you then determine what is the best role for the public sector to take on next? Now, there are widely different approaches to this around the world, as I know, depending very much on the more or less interventionist stances that governments want to take. This is not, of course, however, simply a matter of what policy stance governments would like to take. It does, crucially, and this is again bringing us back to, we stand here at a moment of severe economic crisis. What are governments going to be able to afford to do? Many, many governments around the world are having to manage significant reductions in public spending. How does that stack up against the need that consumers are strongly expressing for more, faster broadband? So one issue is, where do you draw the line? When does the state intervene? The second is, what's the mix of technologies that you might want to try to deploy to reach that final group of your fellow citizens who are asking for this, but for whom it is possibly unfeasible for market solutions to deliver. I want finally, before I hand over to Luigi, to move just quickly on to talk a little bit about the point I made at the beginning, that I think we mustn't, in these technical, regulatory and political discussions, lose sight of why we're doing all this. At Ofcom in the UK, our primary duty under the law is to look out for the interests of consumers and citizens. Now, I've noted that the economic crisis has raised and is continuing to raise real and difficult issues around investment and capacity for the firms that we and other regulators regulate. But I would like to warn, just in case anybody had this idea, which I hope they don't, I wanted to warn against drawing any inference that regulators and policymakers should therefore in some way exercise regulatory forbearance. We at Ofcom reject the argument that a regulatory holiday or any other forbearance approach might be appropriate now for the rollout of next generation access or indeed any other services. We believe that consumers who are very hard pressed in many respects need and deserve continuing strong, effective, consumer-focused regulation which continues to crack down on harmful business practices. And let's be very clear about this. Harmful business practices there are. The new framework that the European Commission has produced provides some much-needed strengthening of our powers to address fraudulent and abusive business practices such as mis-selling, and we will not tolerate such practices in our jurisdiction. We also continue our focus on empowering consumers to act in an informed way in the marketplace. We have had strong concerns in the UK that the broadband market was developing around an essentially misleading consumer proposition on broadband speeds, and we are continuing to work to ensure that consumers get very good information on that. So before I hand over to Luigi, I would just like to say I've tried to sketch there my understanding, our understanding of the difficult issues facing us at this moment. I have tried to indicate that I think we have to address them from the standpoint always of who are we doing this for, and ultimately it's for the end consumer. I would also very much like to hear at the Q&A session about other approaches to the important issues that we've sketched out. This morning, everybody who has spoken, who has so far spoken from a European perspective, I think has got a broad agreement about what the questions are. We don't have answers, but we would very much like to hear from you about new approaches that you may be trying, insights you have that may help us to find global solutions to some of these most important problems. Thank you.